first talk is by Casey Ellis. So I'll just briefly read out your little speaker bio, Casey. So Casey is the founder, chairman, and CTO of BugCrowd. So he is a 20-year veteran of information security, servicing clients ranging from startups to multinational corporations as a pen tester, security and risk consultant, and solutions architect. Now, Casey and BugCrowd are what we've sort of termed an Australian success story in terms of technology. So we're really keen to have him here. I can already tell he's got his looped video running. Sorry, I ruined that one for you. But what I will do now is I will stop sharing and I will hand over to Casey.
No worries. Thank you. Let me bring this up, get rocking and rolling. All right, are we good? Good for the share? Just checking.
We are good.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Shanna. Thank you, everyone who has been involved in putting ComfyCon together. It's been very cool, working with you guys, getting towards the day and just sort of watching it all come down. For it to be a grassroots thing that comes together in the way that this has is a testament, I think, to the Australian security community, and it's a testament to the vision and the work that you guys have put into it. So thank you so much for that. Virtual round of applause from my end here as well. So yeah, my name's Casey Ellis. Going to talk today about the Disclose.io project, basically vulnerability disclosure and hacker safe harbor in 2020. Ian's kind of preempted a fair bit of the intro stuff here, which is great. But there's basically the hustle Casey and then the hacker Casey. The hustle Casey is the founder, chairman, CTO of BugCrowd. I also have a fair bit of hacker, dealing with the community and trying as best as I possibly can at this point not to get too rusty on the tools. But yeah, basically we started Disclose.io out of BugCrowd. I'll get into that shortly. 20 years in InfoSec, and my career arc is kind of, the typical pen tester to something story. In my case, it was pen tester through the solutions architecture and sales on the front end of the house. Then I broke bad, decided I wanted to do startups and became an entrepreneur. Founded BugCrowd in 2012 as the first platform out there to do the hacker as a service model, which has since become very much a thing. So we actually announced a $30 million financing yesterday, and that's just continuing to grow. The demand for this stuff is important, but that kind of ties back into what we're going to talk about today around disclosure and the need for it to be adopted ubiquitously and the need for hackers to be able to stay safe as they're trying to help the internet be more secure. So for those of you who don't know this backstory, that might be newer to the whole space of security research or just haven't heard it, the CFAA, which is kind of the main anti-hacking law in the United States, and can be argued as the main kind of almost grandfather language for anti-hacking laws in other parts of the world, was actually born out of Ronald Reagan watching war games at Camp David and promptly freaking the fuck out and saying we need to create some legislation that stops people from doing this. That is, like, it sounds like a hyperbolic story, but that's actually literally what happened according to history and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is that it hasn't changed since. A lot of these laws and a lot of the frameworks that are in place around creating legality for malicious hacking or have been constructed without the idea of someone being a hacker in good faith, even on the radar of the people that were writing that language. And that's the challenge that we've got today. The idea of bug bounties of disclosure, of hackers coming in and actually helping and being a part, functionally of the internet's immune system is something that's gone from an early concept to being quite widely known and fairly well adopted. But the internet doesn't tend to know how to work with its immune system in the form of these laws, and I think in the form of the expectations that organizations have, which nets out to not enough of the conversation being able to take place. Like, Disclose.io is really about the idea of how do we make vulnerability disclosure just a normal part of how the internet operates, get it from this kind of awkward middle stage. There's been a ton of progress from it being a thing that was incredibly difficult 8 or 9 years ago to this kind of awkward tweener phase that we're in now. How do we cross over into the point where it's just what you do? So a little bit of history, excuse me. So in 1995, And I think this is really important for folks that have joined into security research or security in general more recently. You know, one of the things that we've seen is this kind of tier of like the crusty old folk. It's almost like the OK boomer of InfoSec that have been around for 10, 15 years, and have actually seen, if they were involved in security research, some of the difficulty and even some of the legal challenges that came up with trying to disclose, trying to even do security research in the first place, let alone getting that information to the defender where it could be fixed. Since through this timeline, what we've seen is not only the adoption of bug bounty and vulnerability disclosure programs, but this huge influx of people wanting to participate. They're either folks that are really into cybersecurity and want to get involved, or folks that are actually using the ability to hack on things in good faith, but with impunity as a way to actually start a career in cybersecurity. We see that a lot. They don't necessarily have this context of the kind of the fights that have been fought already and some of the normals that have already been disrupted but are currently incomplete, as I mentioned before. So quick little history lesson here. In 1995, Netscape launched the Bugs Bounty program. Fortunately, we dropped the Z because it's cleaner, as you do in Silicon Valley. And I thought that was some pretty incredible foresight for them. They launched network-facing software at a time when the internet itself was very young. I think for Netscape, having talked to a bunch of people that were involved in that, it was partly about protecting their product. It was actually, for the larger part, protecting the future of the internet itself. They were looking at it thinking, okay, if there's no trust in this ability to communicate across these networks because things keep breaking or things keep on being exploited, then the growth of the internet's potentially at risk because of that. So they did a pretty bold thing and started the first Bugs Bounty program back in '95. Around 2008, Facebook and Google started to get into the whole thing and really make a bunch of noise about it. Bugcrowd was formed. I've been thinking about how to basically unlock the potential of the white hat hacker community and actually connect it to create opportunity for hackers by helping solve problems in cybersecurity. And that was off the back of a lot of the press and the kind of market education that Google and Facebook were doing back in around 2010. So we hit the scene in 2012. And by 2013, we realized a couple of things. It's like, the researchers don't really read the briefs. They know that there's a program there. We try to get it as simple and as easy for them to consume as possible, if to the degree the client allows. They're kind of not reading it anyway because there can be detail in there. They just seem to just go off and hack and do their thing the same as they always would. Then it's like, well, the organizations, their legal teams always seem to want to turn these briefs into war and peace. If you think it's hard convincing a company to launch a disclosure program, wait until you talk to your legal team. They'll probably spit coffee or tea or whatever it is that they're drinking at the time across the room, because it's just not something they've ever considered the need to do before. So it's a brand new concept for a legal team of any form. And the way lawyers usually respond to that sort of thing is by being very verbose in their output. So you end up with these 10-page briefs with all of these carve-outs and different things. And it's not great. And then going back to where I started with the war games story, the CFAA, other anti-hacking laws in other parts of the world actually create this condition where if the brief and the legal language in the brief is the thing that constitutes authorization to do the testing, getting this wrong in some parts of the world actually constitutes a felony crime. So this is actually not a small problem. It's one of those things where it's like, we need to be able to figure out how to stop this from happening. This is the prosecutions under 18 U.S.C. 1030, which is the CFAA, since 1995. And you can see it's risen and it's steadily held. It's actually trended up slightly ever since then. The intent of the CFAA itself is not to prosecute people that are operating in good faith. That wasn't why it was made. It has been used in that way. And the folk that we've spoken to and that we have relationship with in Department of Justice and other places that are similar here in Australia and over in the UK are all on the same page that the intent of these sorts of laws is not to go after good faith research. They need a vehicle to be able to prosecute the bad guys in this sense. But all of this, if you're doing security research and you feel like you're threatened by this type of law, it's going to slow you down. And oftentimes it prevents the flow of information that can reduce the risk of the internet overall to begin with, which is a pretty crappy outcome from my perspective. So how do we make it easy to do this well? In 2014, which was around the same time, the ISO 24197 and ISO 30111 standards on vulnerability intake and disclosure were released. At that time, they were behind a paywall, so not everyone had access to them. And if you've seen those things, they're quite long and quite prescriptive. What we wanted to do was to find a way to make it simple. How can we create boilerplate language that balances being legally complete with being easy to read and providing safe harbor for both sides of the equation, the hackers and the companies? That was a collaboration between us and Safeharbor. That kind of became almost the copy pasta, fodder for a lot of the bounty program and vulnerable disclosure program briefs that you'll interact with today. It's been translated into different languages, all sorts of stuff. It's basically people looking to launch these programs, their legal teams or their security teams going out and Googling stuff and then trying to appropriate it for themselves. In 2018, Amit El-Azhari hit the talk circuit to talk about this idea of safe harbor. And by the way, safe harbor is not like, it's kind of like responsible versus coordinated. Like, words are hard, especially in security. I think safe harbor is the most descriptive way of talking about it. Legally, it's interesting to apply that term to this particular thing, but that's an aside. The idea is that if you're following the guidelines of a particular set of expected behaviors, then you are given these particular provisions or you're granted things in exchange for that. And in the case of exemption from CFAA, it's actually authorization to attempt access to the machine. If you're talking about DMCA, it's basically exemption from circumventing any of the controls that might exist around that particular piece of software. Dropbox jumped in, launched their safe harbor clause, and we started to collaborate with them. And we launched Disclose.io in 2018. In 2019, early in that year, we actually basically made it the default. So every new bug crowd program for the disclosure style programs has this language by default. So then we got to thinking some more, like, how do we make adoption of vulnerability disclosure programs go viral? How do we make this into the new normal? There's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about viral and the new normals right now. And I've tried to dial back talking about viral growth of things because it's a bit too soon, I think. But really that is the concept, the idea of, making best practice, making organizations that do this well so visible and rewarded in that behavior that their peers want to start to do it too. And the net outcome of all of that is that the internet ends up a safer place. Hackers end up, less vilified, more, understood, I think, and more engaged by the people that we're wanting to help and that we, frankly enjoy the opportunity to help. So what is it? I'm burning through this because I'm trying to make sure I keep through the time. The components of Disclose.io, it's really three core pieces or three core goals that we've got. Standardization, which I mentioned. How do we eliminate the friction of understanding? One of the interesting things about writing a legal document that's complete is this consideration that a lot of the people that are actually going to be reading this thing, quote unquote, in the researcher realm, not a lot of them are lawyers. And not all of them are English as a first language. So if it's written in English, you've got to consider the vocabulary that's available to the person who's actually reading this thing. So there's some really interesting design balances that we've had to do to try to get this language right. Those are the terms. Network effects is the second principle. How do we promote best practice and have it promote itself? And that's the list. And then ubiquity, how do we promote the posture of early adopters and actually drive the adoption of Safe Harbor, which is the mark, the Disclose.io mark. And I'll go through those. So the terms themselves, I kind of preempted that. Bilateral safety for the organizers and for the people that are doing hunting and finding. It needs to be as legally complete as possible, but not at the expense of readability. And again, anyone who's a lawyer or has worked with lawyers in this group, those are a fairly tricky set of things to actually balance out against each other, but we've got a lot of help. This is why it's an open source project. The logos on the side here, they aren't formal company endorsements. They're basically representation of the people that are actually participating in the project. There's folks from Intel, from Bugcrowd, Rapid7, GitHub, folks from the DoD, folks from the DHS, Department of Justice, so on. They're all coming in and helping either by committing PRs to the repo or by basically joining the discussion and getting involved in the groups when we do working groups for updates around these terms. And the idea of this is that it needs to be a boilerplate. Like if someone's going to launch a disclosure program, they need to be able to copy, paste, fill in the things that are specific to them, and then be more or less good to go at that point. What we see at this stage is a lot of organizations taking it and using it as the foundation for how they build out their programs. So they'll add things in that are specific to their particular needs or their particular environment. That's where we kind of go back to reinforcing. I'll get to that in a second with the mark. Like if it's safe harbor, then you get a reward for that. If it's not, then you get a call out for launching a VDP, but you don't get called out as being best of breed with safe harbor. The collection that we've got right now, simple safe harbor, which is basically a block of text that you can just add to a program. The global terms are the ones that address the core issues, as I mentioned before, but we'll again here. Authorization against anti-hacking laws. Most anti-hacking laws hinge around the idea of authorized access. Did you exceed the access for which you were authorized? The challenge with that in any kind of offensive security testing context is that your whole kind of goal is to exceed your authorized access a lot of the time. So it gets tricky, and that's one of the reasons that needs to be basically preemptively authorized in this language. Exemption against anti-circumvention laws, so the DMCA, you see that there's large software manufacturers that have used that over the years to actively chill security research. We've seen some stuff happen in the medical device space. We're seeing actually some stuff happen in the election infrastructure space at the moment that's using this whole idea of anti-copyright to actually chill security research and stop people from going out and saying that things are broken when they are. And we want to get rid of that. So here's your exemption against those types of laws if the work that you're doing is conducted in good faith. That also applies to the terms of service and acceptable use policies. And the fourth piece is a general statement of good faith. It's basically, we get what you're doing. You're here to help us. You're not here to harm us. We recognize what you're doing as such, and that goes into the language. We've regionalized that to fit into Canada, and we've actually just released the first draft of a set of terms that we're going to basically partner with the states for them to use in the context of the general elections in 2020 in the United States, which is a very interesting problem to be working on and a complicated one. But really the idea of bond disclosure there is the concept of making the average voter more confident to still go out and vote. We want to secure the systems as well, but we also want to make sure that voters don't just give up and not bother because they think that Russia's going to change whatever they said anyway. And then core terms in other areas that we're adding in as we go along. Healthcare obviously is one of them that we're looking at with everything that's going on right now. All right, so the list. The list is a true community-powered vendor-agnostic directory of all known bond disclosure programs and bug bounty programs. Michael Skelton, who's speaking later, Luke Stevens, and some other folks have been awesome in driving more activity to that list. The idea is for it to almost be like a treasure hunt. So as a consumer, if you're a bounty hunter, if you're someone who's doing security research, if you're someone who's using it to populate a website with a list on it, however you're wanting to use it to be able to render back to the internet what's happening in this space, you can consume this list. It's open source, it's CC 4.0. It's all good to go. But having people not just find new programs and add it, but actually go back, look through the terms and determine whether or not they do include safe harbor provisions as a part of that, which we then use to power the logo. So this is essentially designed to be almost like your safety house or your neighborhood watch sticker. If you go somewhere and you see this as a hacker, as a consumer even, because neighborhood watch for the internet is a fairly easy thing to understand. So the idea here is to get it to the point where Joe and Jane Internet can actually see this and feel more confident about who they're dealing with, and others as well. That's the idea, is to basically reduce this practice down to a mark that actually benefits everyone who's involved. And the difference between partial safe harbor and full safe harbor, this is a question that we get a lot. Partial safe harbor is basically saying, we're agreeing not to pursue you if you do these things, which is good, but it's incomplete because it's based on that statement and that statement being held to over time. For full safe harbor, you're actually granting authorization. So theoretically, what's going on there is that you're almost preventing yourself from being able to pursue a researcher from a legal standpoint, as long as they follow the terms and the guidelines of the rest of the disclosure policy. In practice, really what it means, 1030s don't tend to get prosecuted at the federal level. They don't reach the courts if there's been a proactive vulnerability disclosure policy put in place. So that's really the goal, is internal alignment, but we want to have the legal language as complete as we can. You put them all together, what do you get? So, the origin, the initial piece, and this is kind of the viral loop that I was talking about before. An organization launches a VDP with full safe harbor, they're added to the list, they're provided with the logo, and they put it on their website. Their customer, step two, the customer sees the logo, they get confidence, they buy more readily, and sales improve because they trust. The hacker sees the logo, they get more confident in the fact that this is an okay place to do research and to actually try to help out. They trust more readily, and security's improved because of the greater degree of conversation. There's a stat out there that up to 60% of hackers surveyed in this particular survey don't submit issues because of fear of repercussions. They look for this language before they'll help out. So it solves that problem in some ways. And then, the really interesting part is the competitor to the organization notices the differentiation that they're getting from it. Wow, these guys look badass. They're doing security well. This is awesome. They're being proactive. They're not waiting for the sky to fall before they do security well. And their customers are acknowledging and rewarding them for that. And this all seems really cool. They get FOMO and they start investigating launching a VDP. Step three, they launch one. Using the terms or not, they might just do it. But if they want to do it in a way that's compliant with the organization that they just got the idea from, they can just copy paste the terms and off they go. And yeah, off they go from there. And then the cycle repeats itself. So this is how we turn vulnerability disclosure adoption into a groundswell. TLDR, it's working. There's a lot of people on the list now. There's a bunch using simple safe harbor. I mentioned OSVDF before and the adoption of that. And there's folks that are actually copy pasting the global terms. Kaspersky did a big press thing about it when they did it a couple of months back, which was kind of fun. The DHS is actually doubling down and driving all federal agencies in the US to adopt a vulnerability disclosure program. There's a whole bunch of really good things happening. But we're not done yet. For Disclose, our goal for 2020 is to have full coverage of the Five Eyes in the terms. So all Five Eye countries starting there. We're going to go well beyond that, but that is a logically useful starting point, given that we're mostly English speakers that are involved in the project. Second is 3,000 programs on the list, 30% with full safe harbor adoption. That's the aspirational goal. And to see logos on 500 web properties that are driving that feedback loop that I mentioned before and actually pushing everything, bubbling it all up. So here's the call to action, because I'm a little bit over time, but we're wrapping it up. For the practitioners, lawyers, and executives in the group that are watching this right now, start a vulnerability disclosure program. I firmly believe that this is something that is in the process of becoming just a normal part of being on the internet. There was a time when it was the thing that the progressive organizations did. Now it's the thing that basically everyone does, and it's becoming more and more like that. And it's a phenomenal act of transparency for your customers. Your teams learn a lot from this builder breaker mindset, mind meld rather, that happens between the builders and the hackers that report issues and back and forth and all of that. There's a lot of good things that come from doing it. Add safe harbor. Make sure that you are aware of the fact that people are concerned about getting sued about this stuff, and that you can do something to increase adoption, increase engagement, and just be best of breed and do the right thing in security if you add those types of carve outs. If you're on the legal side, we are looking for help with creating a set of terms for the Australian language. So if anyone's up for helping out with that, feel free to hit me up afterwards and spread the good word. On the security researcher side, as always, hack the planet. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay curious and keep digging into things. For the younger players, I think, as I kind of tipped out at the start, push for better security, but have empathy. I think the reason that we're having to put so much work into getting the internet to even think about doing this stuff in the first place is that it's off the back of a 30-year history of being really bad at getting along. And we're at a point now where there's progress and there's improvement happening there. So have empathy for what's happening on the other side as you submit issues. it's a pretty interesting experience to get a bug from someone on the outside for the first time. It's usually quite a confronting thing. I think just stopping for a second and thinking about what's actually going on is a really helpful thing for younger players in the space to do. And for the older folk, the InfoSec boomers, consider the example you're setting for new entrants who don't have the context. I think, a lot of the work, I fundamentally understand the need for full disclosure and some of the other things that go on in the security space. It does have a potential knock-on impact for normalizing it for the younger generation that's coming in. And I think we need to be careful about that, because this is what the internet looks like in the future, is the example that we set right now. And, I encourage everyone to mentor and encourage and train the younger generation to get involved and to continue to contribute to being a part of the internet's immune system. So that is my spiel. Thank you so much for ComfyCon. It's very cool to be back in Oz and talking at an Oz conference. And I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to come and chat, Ian and Shanna.
No, thank you very much, Casey. It's great to see this project going. I know there's been a lot of discussion lately about, or at least the feeds that I see, about disclosure programs and the effectiveness of disclosure programs and all this kind of stuff. So it's really good to see sort of efforts to try and standardize these in a way that benefits both the company and the researchers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that.